there's clearly something happening. Maybe the legal departments at these networks are worried, not just about what Fox would do, but what the Justice Department under Pam Bondi would do, what the IRS could do, what the FCC could do to them. And it is all part of what democracy defenders call preemptive obedience. And it's very scary.
Welcome to Beg to Differ, the Bulwark's weekly roundtable discussion featuring civil conversation across the political spectrum. We range from center-left to center-right. I'm Mona Charan, syndicated columnist and policy editor at the Bulwark, and I'm joined by our regulars, Bill Galston of the Brookings Institution and the Wall Street Journal, Damon Linker, who writes the Substack newsletter Notes from the Middle Ground, and Linda Chavez of the Niskanen Center. Our special guest this week is Matt Bennett, Executive Vice President for Public Affairs at Third Way. Welcome, one and all. I almost want to say welcome to the circus because it has a little bit of that feel. TV show stars being very, very prominent in the president-to-be's cabinet choices and other things. We've got the return of Mehmet Oz, and we've got Pete Hegseth and so forth. So let's start with the consideration of these choices and what they tell us about what's coming. Pete Hegseth has been trooping over to the Hill to speak with Republican senators, and he had his mom appear on Fox and Friends to say that email that she wrote to him in 2018, accusing him of being just a really reprehensible human being, that he is a changed man, and no longer an abuser of women and a drunk and a lot of other things. She says that the Senate really should confirm him, and he promises, Matt Bennett, I'm going to start with you. He promises that if confirmed, he will stop drinking. So very encouraging. He was chosen for what? For the lantern jaw, and it's not looking good for him, which is a good sign, right? It's a good sign that at least there's some life in the old senators yet.
Let's hope so. I mean, the guy couldn't possibly be worse for this job for like 16 different reasons. First of all, he's totally unqualified. I mean, the biggest thing he's ever run is a small nonprofit. I helped run a small nonprofit. I'm not qualified to be the Secretary of Defense. There are 2 million Americans under arms. The budget's about $500 billion. It's incredibly complicated. He was in the military. He served honorably. But there are a lot of people in the military, and most of them aren't up to being Secretary of Defense. So A, totally unqualified. B, he clearly has a problem with alcohol. I don't know what to call it. I was on CNN yesterday and was kind of tut-tutted by the host when I said he was a drunk. But, he showed up for work drunk. Like
at 10 a.m.
10 a.m. Like, what would you call that? So, and the Secretary of Defense is second in the chain of command from the president. When the president wants to use the military in some way, the person the president calls is the Secretary of Defense, and then they issue orders down the chain. That usually, or at least often, happens at night. So if you're just drinking till you're passed out drunk at night, that's not really great for the Secretary of Defense. And I think if he does have a problem with alcohol, I think most people would stipulate that alcoholics say they're going to stop drinking when they get one of the most stressful jobs on earth, probably can't be trusted to do that. And then the third thing is his theory about how and when to use the military. I mean, he has, first of all, he has pushed Trump when Trump was president before to pardon some truly terrible people who committed murders and other things in the line of duty. And he has said many times that he thinks the military should be used in ways that are clearly illegal under the Posse Comitatus Act or maybe unconstitutional to enforce laws against American citizens. So Pete Hegseth is a very, very dangerous guy in that job. the good news, I think, is not only are the senators looking like they have some spine, but Trump does not like people who abuse alcohol. His brother died of alcoholism, and this seems to have gotten to him. And there was reporting yesterday that he's already talking to Ron DeSantis about the job.
Yeah. Damon, one sort of ray of light in the darkness of contemplating this next Trump administration is watching these toadies to Trump get so badly treated by Trump. So here's Hegseth, who's done nothing but suck up to Trump. And so Trump gives him this appointment. And then even as Hegseth is on the air saying, I just spoke to President Trump, who said he's going to back me to the hilt, Trump leaks it out that he's actually thinking of replacing him with Ron DeSantis. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. What can I say?
Yeah, I mean that's just par for the course with Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, you observe the first Trump administration, and you can see some pretty bad abuse, pretty much weekly of his staff and everyone in the administration when it seemed in Trump's interest. I did want to add, since you came to me right after what Matt was talking about, I mean, I totally agree. Hegseth is an atrocious choice. I mean, given what we've learned about him, I don't think he should be running a gas station, let alone the second largest organization on the planet. It's truly mind-boggling that this is the guy who Trump has chosen to serve in this incredibly important and incredibly difficult job. I will say I would not vote for Ron DeSantis in an election, but he is 10,000 times more capable of doing this job. And I would be perfectly content with him as Secretary of Defense in a second Trump administration. He's the governor for now going on 6 years of a major state. He's popular in it. He has a military background. He's a competent manager. That's what you need in this job, is someone who knows how to run a large organization competently. And again, he does have the military background too. It makes sense for DeSantis to take such a position. He's term limited in Florida. He's now blocked to be anything like an heir apparent for Trump in 2028 by J.D. Vance. It just makes perfect sense, and he probably should have been the choice in the first place. The idea that Trump went to this guy because he likes watching him on Saturday morning on Fox and Friends is as Trumpy as you could imagine, but really just a pathetic choice. And, you know, we could go down the line and talk about all the other bad choices too, but Hegseth is particularly irksome to me, given again, the importance of this job and the particular list of character faults that the guy apparently has. I mean, his mom goes on TV to like walk away the things that she wrote about him just 6 years ago. I mean, it's funny. It would be like probably less believable, but like more apt if she were to like, it would be better for him if she said, "Oh, I was under the influence when I wrote that. That wasn't true." But no, her line is, "Well, he's not that way anymore. Oh, he had a come to Jesus moment since." Okay. Yeah, that's really believable, Mom. The whole thing is just, as you said, Mona, at the top, a circus, but you know, that is in a way to make light of something that is far graver than that.
No, that's exactly right. It's not funny. This is the security of all of us and the stability of the world, fairly high stakes moment. Linda, let's just talk for a second about, it's not just Hegseth. There are several other people that Trump has tapped who all have histories of viciously abusing women. And it is really, it's really a moment to reflect on the corruption of our standards all across the board, that those things are no longer considered disqualifying. In fact, you could argue, based on the people Trump chose, that it's almost table stakes for this crowd, that you have to have, several accusations of sexual assault or, certainly a problem with monogamy, even to qualify.
Mona, let me take a moment of personal privilege here, because I think I'm probably the only panelist who has twice failed to secure Senate confirmation. The most recent and the most public of them was when I was nominated by George W. Bush to be Secretary of Labor. And just want to talk a little bit about the process, because that to me is terribly important. When I was originally approached for that position, I went in, I was interviewed by both then President-elect Bush and Vice President-elect Cheney, spent, I don't know, an hour and a half, 2 hours with them being grilled. I had to come up with every single thing I had ever written in my entire life that had been published. I had 2 binders that were like, that thick, that had to be gone through. Then I had to fill out the federal form that you have to fill out when you're going to have a Senate confirmable job. And on it, you were asked all sorts of things about problems with alcohol. And I remember Fred Fielding, who was doing some of the vetting, asking me if I had had any special
White
friends.
House counsel.
Counsel.
He would go on to be White House counsel.
Yes, he would. And he had also served with us in the Reagan administration. And he wanted to know if I had any special friends. And I started to list off all my special friends. That's not what he meant. He let it be known that he was really talking about, did I have any men in the background that they needed to find out about? And I was joking this weekend with someone who worked for me at the time of the confirmation and who actually was questioned by the FBI and went on television to talk about his experience. I ended up having to step aside because more than a decade before, I had living with me a woman who was undocumented, who a friend had asked me if I could give her a place to live. She was in a women's shelter. She'd been battered. And I said yes. And then I helped her get a job with a neighbor of mine who, lo and behold, I didn't know was a Democratic fundraiser. And so when the FBI came to her, she said, oh, by the way, there was this woman living with her. Now that all got presented as a Zoe Baird problem, one who'd been nominated for Attorney General by Bill Clinton, and it was assumed that she was working for me. In fact, I stated, my assistant, John Miller, who worked every day in my office at home with me, said, no, you didn't see her doing any cleaning or any of that. And my kids were already teenagers. She didn't need a babysitter. None of that mattered. The fact that I hadn't told him that a woman was living with me and undocumented, that was enough for me to step aside. And frankly, I should have told him. I should have thought of it. I should have been more forthcoming. But what's happened here is that whole process has been dispensed with. There is no process. They're not filling out the federal forms. They're not having the FBI go door to door, talk to all your neighbors, everybody you went to grade school with. None of that. And that's the problem. And the reason they're not doing it is exactly the reason you said, Mona. These are people who could not withstand that kind of scrutiny. Maybe you don't have to be a saint to be a Secretary of Defense or Labor or anything else, but you do have to have a pretty clean record. And the main reason is you don't want foreign governments or anyone else blackmailing you when you're in office. And he's just simply dispensed with all of that. So,
Bill Galston, the list of awful nominees is very long. But let's take a look at the brighter side of things, which is, a couple of weeks ago, we were looking at the possibility that Trump was going to demand that the Senate step aside entirely from its advice and consent role, and that he was going to do this via recess appointments, or that he was going to threaten any senator with a primary who dared to question or fail to confirm any of his appointees. And instead, it's not playing out that way. Matt Gaetz withdrew. It looks like Hegseth is in trouble. Several senators, Joni Ernst and others, have said, we had a full and frank conversation, not endorsing. He seems to be in trouble. And of course, Trump is signaling that he's ready to throw him overboard. So do you see those things as hopeful, or, what's your sense of this?
I didn't expect Donald Trump to make responsible nominations. I do have hope that the Senate will block the irresponsible nominations. And the fact that apparently it has refused to step aside just because Trump wanted them to, and having refused, now appears to be doing its constitutional duty, I think counts as good news in these sad times. This is not a time of testing for Trump. He's been tested and found wanting 100 times over, but this is a time of testing for the U.S. Senate. And we'll all be better off, and the world will be safer if the United States Senate passes this test. And it's interesting that you mentioned Joni Ernst, because I regard her as a test case for a tested Senate. If in the face of what she has experienced personally, what she has spoken about repeatedly as the United States.
You should spell that out for listeners, just in case they don't know about her history.
Well, my understanding is that she is herself, please correct me if I'm remembering incorrectly, a victim of sexual assault while in the military.
Correct.
And she has made herself into one of the Senate leaders on that subject. So here she is, confronted with a nominee who has been plausibly accused of doing exactly what she has denounced in every conceivable forum. If she ends up voting for him, then I withdraw all of the hopeful remarks that I just made about the U.S. Senate. But if she does what she clearly knows she should do, whether or not she ends up doing it, then I will be the first to say that at least she has passed the test that's applicable to her. And I hope there are enough of her Senate colleagues who will do the same. But speaking of the other nominees for just a minute, I think Tulsi Gabbard, as the head of national intelligence, would give Hegseth a run for his money in potential damage to the vital interests of the United States. Hegseth is unqualified, but Gabbard is negatively qualified. That is to say, putting her in there would be like, calling in a substitute from the other team to fill a hole in your line. Nuts.
Yeah. She has repeated Kremlin talking points about the U.S. having bioweapons labs in Ukraine. She has defended Russian airstrikes against Syrian rebels. She is a favorite of RT, the Russian news channel, so-called news. She is just an obvious, she should be disqualified from having any position in any intelligence agency, far less be at the very pinnacle. It is inexplicable. But I'm coming back to you, Matt Bennett, because, Bill Galston says, well, if the Senate does its job in blocking the bad nominees, and I submit that's not possible because there are just too many. Kash Patel, he plans to fire the FBI director whose term doesn't expire for another 3 years, violating that, by now, time-tested tradition of keeping the FBI director above politics by giving him 10-year terms. So he's going to fire, it looks like, the FBI director for no reason. Like there's no implication of wrongdoing on the part of Christopher Wray. He just wants to put in his hitman, Kash Patel, who has an enemies list that he published in a book that includes, many leading Democrats, many leading Republicans, members of the press. Oh, he left out members of the press because he said that almost goes without saying. And he's threatened to come after members of the press. I personally feel very strongly that RFK Jr. is a severe threat to the health and welfare of the nation. He doesn't present the kind of security risk necessarily that Hegseth and Gabbard do. But oh my God, he is he is a very dangerous person who is responsible for deaths already in Samoa. Measles outbreak of more than 100, mostly children, died from measles with his encouragement, I should say. Anyway, so it just is not possible that the Senate will block all of the terrible nominees that we've got here. So my question for you is this, Matt. Are they ever going to pay the price for this disaster? Is Trump ever going to be held to account, or is he going to be able to, escape by saying that, like, for example, pretending to deport a bunch of people through a few performative gestures, putting some people on airplanes and buses, and then saying, I solved the problem, it's over, and never, I just worry that there's going to be no consequence. What do you think?
There is zero evidence that Trump has ever been held to account successfully in any way politically. And I don't think he will be held to account in his lifetime. I think he will be held to account by history, but that's pretty cold comfort for those of us who have to live through it. We don't know how catastrophic the next 4 years are going to be. Could be pretty bad. But then again, his first term resulted in 1 million Americans dying of COVID. Some of those were going to die anyway, but his mismanagement led to the deaths of a lot of people. We'll never know the number. To your point about Robert F. Kennedy, it's not just Kennedy. The people, the absolute lunatics that he is appointing to run the NIH, the CDC, the FDA, to be the Surgeon General. These are crazy people who believe crazy things. They do not believe in science. They are there to gut those agencies. And if, God forbid, we have another pandemic, which is, if not likely, very possible in the next 4 years, you can be certain that we will not do even the things that Trump did relatively successfully last time, which is to develop the vaccines that ended up saving tens or hundreds of millions, maybe billions of lives. And so I think in terms of our physical safety, presuming that war doesn't come to the United States shores, the most dangerous people that he's appointing are the people, Kennedy and the people below him, I think are incredibly scary. And I don't think that they will be stopped, because I think what Trump is doing is what he always does, which is to flood the zone with nonsense. And he didn't think Matt Gaetz was going to be the attorney general. He figured, I'll take a flyer on it, probably won't work. But he knew that their appetite to stop his nominees has a limit. So they might stop Hegseth. They stopped Gaetz. Maybe they stopped Gabbard. That probably is it. Everybody else probably gets through the nominations process. And if they don't, Mike Johnson does some kind of crazy recess appointment thing where they recess Congress and he just appoints them himself. So I think he gets most of these people into his cabinet and into high positions in government. And it's just staggeringly dangerous and scary. And, I just don't see him being held to account for that, because he is just seemingly immune from that kind of thing.
2 points. First of all, Trump was dismissed from office after 1 term by a sizable margin. And he managed to mobilize 81 million Americans to come out and vote against him. So he is not immune. Second, and pertinent to the next 4 years, there are 2 kinds of Trump voters, at least. But let me simplify. Type number 1 is people who are devoted to him personally, for whom he can do no wrong. But that wasn't the critical portion of the electorate that pushed him over the top.
No.
What moved him from a little less than 47% to a little less than 50%, that crucial 3%, were people who hired him to do very specific jobs. having to do with inflation, immigration, and all the other issues that showed up at the top of all the post-election polls. And believe me, they will notice if he fails to do those jobs. So, the idea that this is Teflon Don, it may seem that way, but if you take a slightly longer view of the matter, I think it would be very foolish for the Democrats to abandon the job of holding him to account for his promises, because that is the metric. We've tried to denormalize Trump, to turn him into some sort of ogre, and that hasn't worked out very well. So, along at least one track, let's treat him as a normal president and hold him accountable for performance.
Yep. And it is certainly the case that he ran on bringing down prices, and yet his signature policies, mass deportations and tariffs, will do nothing but raise prices. So we'll see how that works out. Did you know that your temperature at night can have one of the biggest impacts on your sleep? If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Inspired by NASA, Miracle Made uses silver-infused fabrics and makes temperature-regulated bedding so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. Did you know that traditional bed sheets can harbor more bacteria than is healthy for you? It can lead to all kinds of problems, stuffy noses, allergies, acne, and it's just unpleasant. Miracle Made offers a whole line of self-cleaning, eco-friendly bedding, such as sheets, pillowcases, and comforters that prevent 99% of bacteria and require a lot less laundry. So those silver-infused fabrics keep you at exactly the right temperature all night long, so you get better sleep every night. They are self-cleaning with the silver-infused fabric that inhibits bacterial growth. They are comfortable. Miracle sheets are luxuriously comfortable without the high price tag of other luxury brands. They feel as nice, if not nicer, than sheets used by some 5-star hotels. Stop sleeping on bacteria. Sleep clean with Miracle. Go to trymiracle.com/beg-to-differ to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. If you use our promo code BEG-to-differ at checkout, you'll also get 3 free towels and save another 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/beg-to-differ and use that code BEG-to-differ to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40%. Again, that's trymiracle.com/beg-to-differ. Okay, let's talk a little bit about authoritarianism and about his capacity to inflict it. There are some in addition to all of the ghouls that he has nominated for high positions in the United States government, there are other things to worry about in this moment, like the fact that the Supreme Court, in one of the most reckless and irresponsible decisions in my lifetime, and maybe longer than that, gave the president sweeping immunity to behave as he sees fit. And no doubt, in the first term, even without that guarantee from the Supreme Court, he was promising pardons to people, his underlings, to do illegal things, even in the first term. And it is, I think, fully within the realm of possibility that he is going to return to that tactic. He is, as Matt mentioned, he wanted somebody at the Defense Department who believes in using the U.S. military against American citizens. And as we and others, David French had a good piece about this, I've talked about before, the Insurrection Act gives the president broad authority to declare a state of emergency and use the military against Americans. And so those are all things, and we can get to any of those. But I want to begin with a little discussion about a friend of the podcast, David Frum, who appeared on the Joe Scarborough show this week on MSNBC. And it's worth dwelling on this for a second, because one of the bulwarks, if you'll forgive the expression, against authoritarianism is the free press. And what we are witnessing in real time right now is the press preemptively capitulating to Trump. You had Joe and Mika, two of Trump's biggest critics and sort of cheerleaders for a morning show that for the last couple of years at least has just been relentlessly critical of Trump and all his doings. And they've had very eloquent people on to make that case. And as soon as the election happened, Joe and Mika scurry down to Mar-a-Lago to have a personal meeting with Trump and make nice to him. And then this week, David Frum was on the show, and he made a joke about hegseth, saying that if he was too drunk for Fox News television or something like that, then that is very drunk indeed, or something like that. Little joke. They basically hustled him off the set and issued a public apology to Fox News for David's comment. And there's more I could add to it. So, Matt, what's your sense? I mean, in addition to those things that I just mentioned, I will throw a couple more things in. You've got Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, giving an interview and saying that he's very proud of the decision that he made not to endorse. And he further said that he's very hopeful about Trump's second term. He said he seems to have a lot of energy around reducing regulation. And if I can help him do that, I'm going to help him. And I'm very optimistic. And I think he has a good chance of being successful. And you've got the new new owner of the LA Times, Patrick Soon-Shiong. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but who also forbade his paper from endorsing, and who has apparently been weighing in with headlines at the paper to make them more MAGA acceptable. Free press looking a little wobbly today, Matt.
Yeah, almost the same thing happened to me on CNN yesterday morning. As I noted, like the host immediately jumped in when I said that Hegseth is a drunk, which he clearly is. Kate Bolin said, "Whoa, wait, well, I mean, we're not ready to," and didn't come back to me. Gave the other, did the unusual thing of giving the other guest 3 questions to my one, which is not the cable standard. So there's clearly something happening. Maybe the legal departments at these networks are worried, not just about what Fox would do, but what the Justice Department under Pam Bondi would do, what the IRS could do, what the FCC could do to them. And it is all part of what democracy defenders call preemptive obedience. And it's very scary. And there was a lot of talk about this after, as you noted, the Washington Post, Bezos forbade them from endorsing Harris. And he just underscored it yesterday, as you say. So we really have to be very, very vigilant about not letting those things go by. I think I applaud you for bringing it up here, because I think it is very important to call them out. And I very much agree with Bill, by the way. He's right. There are checks that can be put on Trump, and he can be held to account if and only if those institutions still capable of doing that, not just Democrats in elected office, but also people in journalism and elsewhere will do it. And if they use the tools of government the way they claim they want to, that may not happen. There's one other thing I should note, which is Olivia Troy, who was one of the whistleblowers from Trump 1 and, campaigned for Harris, has worked with the Bulwark. She got a very threatening letter yesterday from Kash Patel's lawyers threatening her with civil action, I guess, for slander or libel, because she went on television and said that said truthfully that Kash Patel put our troops at risk by, shooting off his mouth in the White House in a particular set of ways. So we must be vigilant about this preemptive obedience, or else Trump will be able to get away with even more.
Damon, what are your thoughts on that? By the way, regarding this lawyer letter to Olivia Troy, if this were any other time, I would have given it the back of my hand, and I'm sure her lawyer will, and say, that's preposterous. Kash Patel is a public figure and it's a free country and you can criticize him. Go away. You're being ridiculous. Confident that no judge in America would let that, that kind of a nuisance lawsuit past the pleading stage. At this moment, I wish I could say that I'm so confident. I don't know. Maybe some judges are going to start to preemptively capitulate.
Well, I mean, if he were just some MAGA guy, I would say, yeah, that's the proper response to it. Just like Trump loves to sue and threaten to sue lots of people who say things about him he doesn't like, and he's done that for a long time. But this is a guy who Trump is nominating to be the FBI director. He's like, this is a guy who is showing that, he very well might and actually probably will try to use federal law enforcement to browbeat and threaten journalists to shut up about himself, about the president, about the administration. And that is horrifying. It is really, really scary stuff, especially when combined with the stuff Matt was talking about preemptive capitulation. Although, you asked me a fairly broad question about this subject, and I do want to kind of broaden it out in a different way, because this week I've been really alarmed for kind of multidimensional reasons, if you will. The lurch to authoritarianism happens dialectically, usually. There is a kind of back and forth between the would-be authoritarian and then attempts by the kind of system-oriented parties or forces to preemptively avoid the move to authoritarianism that can unintentionally help the authoritarian. And I've seen some evidence of that this week in ways that I find fairly alarming. One of them begins with Joe Biden's pardon of his son, Hunter Biden, which I think has its own distinctive problems that I won't really get into because they're complicated and they don't speak directly to this topic. But I think that's really bad that he's done this. Much worse, and I hope is just a trial balloon that sinks immediately, is a story that Jonathan Martin had in Politico on Wednesday evening saying that people within the Biden administration, apparently, according to the story, not Biden himself, it has not risen yet to his desk, but there are people talking about issuing preemptive pardons of people who the Biden administration thinks could be gone after by the Trump administration. And this includes people like Liz Cheney, like a preemptive pardon from the Biden administration to protect her and others from being attacked and gone after by Trump and his people. Now, on one level, say the level of personal morality, I find that almost noble, like, oh, we're going to protect the good guys against the bad guy. But that in political terms is crazy. You cannot do that. And I will say it is exactly that kind of logic that got us the Trump v. United States decision that you rightly, Mona, noted earlier was terrible. It was that same logic that led them to give close to blanket immunity to the president by saying that
I don't see the connection.
The danger in that decision, the Supreme Court majority said, is not that Trump is a danger. It's that Trump or someone like Trump could prosecute a future president.
Right.
And that this is what they described as the presidency cannibalizing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, this thing that some people inside the Biden administration are entertaining is an attempt to preemptively protect people, to give them, in effect, a kind of blanket immunity, even though they're not president, by giving them a pardon ahead of any accusation of a criminal act, and say, essentially, any criminal act that you may have done, could have done, might have been unknown, and yet we're going to say you can't be gone after, you can't be looked at, investigated, and prosecuted by the federal government. It's throwing, again, a blanket of protection over people for crimes that we're presuming they didn't commit. And it's assuming that any attempt to go after them is wrong and unjustified. And I'm willing to say, I'm pretty sure Liz Cheney and others who they're looking at probably are not criminals. But you cannot preemptively preclude such investigations in order to protect them. And I just think there is nothing that would play more into the hands of a would-be authoritarian like Trump than doing a move like that, to say, in effect, that it would look really suspicious, and he would be able to use that to gain support for his own authoritarian grab by saying, look, they're trying to protect their crooks. And the last, I know you want to break away, but I do, since I'm the one guy on the podcast who consistently was extremely skeptical of the attempt to defeat Trump by going after him in legal terms. It's the same logic at work here, that you can't, I agree, you want to protect people who are innocent if they're going to be attacked and prosecuted unjustly. But if you attempt to do it, you inadvertently end up strengthening the hand of the very person who wants to do it, and you should not do that.
Okay. So, first of all, let me just say, for the record, because I've been thinking about this a lot, is that you were right about that it was a mistake to prosecute Trump, and you haven't gotten enough credit for that. And so I'm happy to
fine. I think
that.
Still in legal terms, it's a dicey question, because I think he's pretty guilty of a lot of stuff.
He is very, and certainly the documents case made it much more difficult to just let it slide.
How do you not prosecute him for that?
Yeah. So it was tough, but I think there's very little doubt that there was a rally around the crook phenomenon that happened in the Republican Party that might not have been the case had he not been indicted. But we'll never know. The counterfactual. Let me also say that I think there's a big difference between what the Supreme Court did, giving prospective immunity to the president for any and all actions that could be colorably called within his core duties, and plus a wider scope than that too, and retroactively saying that anybody who committed crimes in the past is getting a pardon. So there's a difference. It's not quite the same thing. On the other hand, I want to ask around the panel if anybody disagrees with Damon that this is the wrong thing for the Biden administration to do. Does anybody want to make the case for pardoning a bunch of people? Nobody. Okay. My concern is that it would, I could imagine a lot of people saying, I don't want a pardon because I don't want to acknowledge that I might have done anything wrong. I did nothing wrong. I was simply, exercising my constitutional rights and duties. In fact, in the case of Liz Cheney and others, paying a high price for doing the right thing, and accepting a pardon would make you look like you were guilty of something. And that's a problem. But I go back and forth on this because at the same time, having the levers of power in the hands of these villains does mean that some people may actually wind up going to jail, who are not just innocent but heroic. And if that can be prevented, it's It's very, very tempting to prevent it if possible. So I don't know. But Linda, what do you think?
I absolutely am opposed to the idea of these prospective pardons. And by the way, Trump was asked to do that and didn't do it in his first term. I think we forget about Trump that he had 4 years before and he was not reelected. Now, he's not going to be up for reelection this time, we hope. But the fact is, people did turn against him when he went too far the last time around. And, sort of getting along on the same train of thought as Damon was on earlier, if bad things happen, including the not prosecution but persecution of people who did nothing wrong happens, and I suspect it will, I think that will be a moment to sort of provoke a kind of revulsion in the public. And I think that Bill was right in talking about the percentage of people who voted for Trump, not because they were fans of his particularly, they may have been voting against Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, but they're not people who are just going to willy-nilly go along with everything Trump wants. So I think that, it is kind of the Marxist dialectic. Things have to get worse before they get better. And I think there is going to be a backlash if Trump goes through and does some of the things that he wants to. I think there's already, we talked about it in terms of the nomination. Senators are already saying, whoa, this is not quite what we meant when we said we were going to support Trump's nominees. So, I don't want to be one of those people. I would feel very badly because some of us know many of these people who they may go after. But it may be that we're going to have to see a little bit of that before the American people say, this is not what we voted for.
Bill, if if the price of groceries comes down and rent gets a little less expensive, do you think the American people will punish Trump for trying to file legal cases against his political enemies?
Not as much as they would if the things that they voted for Trump to do aren't done. If he's seen as honoring the most visible promises that he made, he'll have a lot of political credibility when he does things that weren't part of the public bargain, but were certainly part of the private plan. No question about that. Let me make one other comment. I think I'm probably the only person on this panel who is old enough to have lived through the McCarthy years back in the 1950s. With regret, I say that there's no way that all the people who should be protected can be protected. And this is going to be a time that tests not only the U.S. Senate, but tests the souls of a lot of people who are going to come under intense pressure. And also tests the souls of people who are then asked to come to the aid of the people who come under intense pressure. Will people run away from them? Or will they contribute to legal defense funds? Will they stand up and tell the truth even when it's difficult? This may well be a time of testing for a much wider circle than elected officials who may be somewhat inclined to do the right thing. And history is replete with examples of ordinary people, decent people, but fearful people who have run away from people who come under unjust attack. And I hope this won't be a repetition of that.
I can pretty much guarantee you that there'll be a lot of that. The thing is, how many heroes will there be? We'll see. Bill, I'd like you to talk a little bit also on this question of the press, though. The behavior that we're seeing already, the kind of cringing by MSNBC, for example.
Well, Machiavelli said 500 years ago that it's better to be feared than to be loved. Now, Joe Biden has pulled off the trick of being neither feared nor loved at this point. But Donald Trump is loved by his friends and feared by his enemies, which is not a bad place to be. And he is instructing us all in the uses of fear to shape human behavior. And we really have to keep that in mind. He is credibly using the threat of fear in order to induce the behavior that he wants. And I'm going to get myself in big trouble for what I'm about to say, but I'll say it anyway. And that is that every effective leader, to some extent, must be able to inspire fear as well as affection. If you're incapable of inspiring fear in your foes, you will be incapable of doing good for your friends. But this does not in any way justify the particular uses to which Donald Trump is putting the fear that he credibly threatens, against his foes.
I would like to quote David Frum, who said in his piece that he just published in The Atlantic about this experience, he said, noted at the end that fear is contagious, but so is courage. And so I think people need to remember that there are some who are showing courage and to emulate that. And I put David very much on that list of courageous people who are not going to be cowed by this crowd.
On this subject of authoritarianism and Trump, which I think is incredibly important, and we will come back to, I'm sure, on other shows. Jack Goldsmith, whom I respect quite a lot, he writes these days at Lawfare mostly. He had a tweet thread, if we can still call them that, at Twitter/X on, I believe it is, November 24th. It was a 17 tweet long thread. I hope listeners will go to it. It is really useful, very practical legal issues that are going to come up early in the Trump administration, areas where Trump tested boundaries the last time and likely will again, areas where things that he's already done in the transition period have raised red flags. And he just enumerates in this list, this is an issue, this is a question. And in other words, these are all areas where there will probably be court, lawyers raising objections to things he's trying to do, and they're going to have to be adjudicated by federal judges. And a lot of them are probably going to end up at the Supreme Court. So if listeners are interested in really digging into the nuts and bolts of these kinds of challenges that are going to be trying to hem him in and keep him within the box of a rule of law abiding presidency, I suggest going to that and bookmarking it, which you can very easily do, and keep it around. It's going to prove useful, I suspect.
Thank you. We'll do. All right. So let us turn now to our highlight, our lowlight of the week. Matt Bennett.
My highlight and lowlight is both things. It is the South Korean president's imposition of martial law, and then the legislature's repealing martial law hours later when citizens took to the streets to demand that the Constitution be followed. And I think, as we've discussed here today, I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope it doesn't come to martial law declarations, and God help us if Congress has to stand up to Trump to do things like that. But I think the fact that the people of South Korea demanded that their democracy be protected is an inspiration for us all.
Thank you. Damon Linker.
Well, I talked earlier about the dialectical way that authoritarians can reach power, and I want to actually raise as a very low light this week something that really scared the living daylights out of me on that theme, and that was the brazen assassination of the CEO of the health insurance company UnitedHealthcare, Brian Thompson, on the street of Manhattan Street, right outside the Hilton Hotel. Lots of tourists have stayed there who visit the city. There's some evidence, we don't know for sure if it's verified, but it appears that etched on the 3 bullets that were shot into this man were slogans that are associated with the far left. This act has also been, much to my shock and dismay, have been praised. One bit of praise from a Columbia University professor, Taylor Lawrence, who is a very prominent journalist who has worked at both the New York Times and the Washington Post, and a lot of other less high-profile people on the far left. I am here to tell you that if we enter a phase of American history in which left-wing terrorists begin assassinating CEOs on city streets, there is absolutely no straighter path to authoritarian dictatorship under Donald Trump than I can possibly imagine in my worst nightmares. So this needs to stop right now. It is utterly unthinkable and atrocious. And the fact that anyone with a prominent platform would do anything other than to condemn it is a really scary comment on where we are culturally in our political culture. So that's my very impassioned lowlight of the week.
Thank you. I had no idea that people were praising this.
Maybe
utterly,
it's I'm still on Twitter /X, it's been circulating a lot, and it's really atrocious. Yeah,
100%. Okay, Bill Galston.
It seems to me that the name for this particular episode should be Oi. But apparently, Trumpified conservatives are not content with threatening democracy at home. They'd like to strangle it abroad as well. And as the latest exhibit in this bill of particulars, I offer the doughty conservative James Pearson, who has just published an article in the New Criterion calling for the zeroing out of the National Endowment for Democracy. In the course of this screed, he attacks a number of my friends by name, for daring to suggest that Orban-like, populist nationalist movements may indeed be a threat to democracy. I mean, it is a political hit job on one of the most effective and necessary institutions that the United States has created in the past half century. I have to say, words fail me, but fear fills me because I am afraid. I mean, it's put in the context. The title of this piece is Doge versus Ned, and it's a direct appeal to Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, to suggest to Donald Trump the zeroing out of the National Endowment for Democracy. I cannot imagine that the President of the United States, now that this has been called to his attention, will be slow to respond. And I don't know what more to say.
You can't even imagine, there's no conceivable argument that this is a cost-cutting measure because it gets a tiny subvention in the federal budget. I mean, it's all about, as you say, the mission of the organization that they don't agree with. They're anti-democratic now.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Linda.
That saddens me deeply. Jim Pearson is an old friend of mine, has supported my work in the past. I have not yet read it. I will go and read it right away, but it makes me very sad. I have another highlight. It may become irrelevant by the time this show airs, but it is a piece by Carlos Lozada, who is the book reviewer in the New York Times, and it's called Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth Have the Same Enemies. He actually took the time to read Pete Hegseth's book, so the rest of us don't have to. And it is insightful in going through and showing that Hegseth wasn't probably just picked because he looks good on Fox News. He's handsome and obviously that's one of the things that Trump looks for in his nominees is whether they look the part. he actually goes through and talks about the enemies that Pete Hegseth has, who are also the enemies of Donald Trump. And one of the things we have to be worried about is the way in which Donald Trump hopes to change the military and the military culture in ways that will make it more amenable to authoritarian control. So it's worth reading, even if Pete Hegseth is out of the way by the time this podcast airs.
Thank you for that. I have two highlights, actually. One is that within the last couple of weeks, the Washington Post published a celebration of George Will's 50 years as a columnist. And it was a special section that came out on Thanksgiving Day with a fantastic essay by David Vondrili, long essay analyzing Will's lifetime of work, really brilliantly written itself. I was honored to contribute a piece to this special edition, and it is sort of encouraging to think that as long, these words will endure through whatever else is going on in the world. People will always be able to repair to this kind of clear thinking and brilliant writing. So congrats to George Will on 50 fantastic years as what some people consider to be the best columnist in American letters. I would also like to highlight a book that I've just finished by Jeffrey Rosen. It's called The Pursuit of Happiness: How Classical Writers on Virtue Inspired the Lives of the Founders and Defined America. This is a brilliant book. I have read a lot of books about the founding and about the founders, and nevertheless, I learned a lot of new things. For example, you often find references to the long correspondence that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had in their retirements, where they reconciled. And then, he gets into the actual content of those letters, and it is fascinating. And he also explores the ways in which Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, and then others as well, including John Quincy Adams and Abraham Lincoln and others, but those mainly read deeply in the wisdom literature of the Greeks, the Romans, and sometimes the Hindus and others in order to get insights into how to pursue happiness, by which they did not mean pleasure. Very important. They meant not short-term pleasure, but the habits of industry, temperance, moderation, sincerity, which the founders viewed as part of a daily struggle for self-improvement, character development, and calm self-mastery. Obviously, not all of these men lived up to the virtues that they propounded. Specifically, we know most famously Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were both slave keepers. So was George Washington, although he freed them in his will. But it is a really, really beautiful exploration of the deeper side of these men who founded this country and how they conceived of what they were doing. And a big part of that was giving all of us the liberty to improve ourselves, and not just to please ourselves. And it's a very, very important lesson to keep in mind. And so I congratulate Jeffrey Rosen on his book and recommend it highly, The Pursuit of Happiness. With that, I want to thank our guest, Matt Bennett, and of course, my regular panel, as well as our great producer, Jim Swift, and our faithful listeners and viewers. Beg to Differ will return next week, as every week.